My sister invited all her high school friends to my graduation party and introduced me as the one who took 7 years to finish college. "You're the late bloomer." One of them laughed. I showed them my job offer letter, $180,000 starting salary. "So this happened last year, and it's been living in my head rent-free." I 29 female, I finally graduated college after 7 long years. At my graduation party, my older sister Dileia 32 female, I took it upon herself to introduce me to her high school friends as the one who took forever to finish college. One of them laughed and said, "You're a late bloomer." And I just stood there, humiliated, until I pulled out my phone and showed them my new job offer, $180,000 starting salary at a tech firm in San Francisco. I'm Mira. I'm 29 now, and last year, I graduated with a degree in UX design. It took me 7 years, 2 schools, 3 major changes, a leave of absence, and more tears than I'll ever admit to my parents. But I did it. I grew up in Maplewood, New Jersey. It's one of those pretty, leafy suburbs where people really care about appearances. The kind of place where lawn signs go up every time a kid gets into a decent college, and where people keep mental scoreboards of everyone else's accomplishments. That's important because in our house, success was very, very visible. My sister Dileia is 3 years older than me. She was the golden child in every sense. Valedictorian, Ivy League, flawless skin, internships at big-name firms before she could legally drink. She's in marketing now, still in New York, with a curated Instagram and a high-profile boyfriend she just divorced last year. Our parents were obsessed with her. Not in a cartoonishly evil, Cinderella stepsister way, just in that subtle, suffocating way where every conversation about her sounded like a TED Talk. And me? I was the quiet one. The sensitive one. I liked sketching, tinkering with web pages, reading about cities and human behavior. I was anxious before I knew what anxiety was. I didn't know how to navigate college the way Dileia did. I floundered. I dropped out after 2 years at NYU because of a bad breakup and crushing burnout. Moved home. Started therapy. Took classes at a community college to rebuild. Slowly found my footing again. My parents didn't shame me outright, but I could feel it in the way they spoke around me. Like I was something fragile and disappointing that they didn't know how to fix. Dileia, meanwhile, would drop these little comments, "It's okay, you're just on your own timeline," or "Some people just take longer to figure out who they are." I don't think she meant them to be cruel, but they stuck like static under my skin. So when I finally walked across the stage at Rutgers last spring, I cried. Not just from pride, but from exhaustion. I'd made it. And my parents, to their credit, insisted on throwing a graduation party. I wasn't excited, but I thought maybe it'd be a clean slate. A moment of celebration without comparison. Dileia offered to help plan the party, which mostly meant she took over. She booked the caterer, decided on the playlist, and, most importantly, controlled the guest list. I didn't realize until the day of the party that most of the people showing up weren't my friends, but hers. Former classmates from high school, people I hadn't seen in over a decade, some of whom I barely remembered. The party was held at our parents' house. It was a nice day, sunny, not too humid. There were fairy lights strung across the backyard, a folding table with catered Italian food, and one of those little chalkboard signs that said, "Congratulations Mira," in pink cursive. People were mingling. I smiled, made small talk, and felt a bit like a guest at my own party. Then Dileia decided to make a toast. She blinked her glass and said something like, "Everyone, I just want to say how proud we are of Mira. So far, so good." But then she launched into this weird, winding speech about perseverance, about how some journeys aren't linear and how it took her a while, but she finally made it. And then she said it. Right there, in front of 20 people, holding her rose like a microphone, 7 years, 3 majors, 2 colleges, but hey, she's our little late bloomer. There was a beat of silence. Then one of her friends, a woman I later remembered was named Blair, actually laughed and said, "You're the late bloomer. That's what we were calling you earlier." And everyone chuckled. Everyone. Even my mom gave one of those tight, polite laughs you give when you know it's rude, but you don't want to make a scene. I felt my face go hot. I wanted to disappear. My whole body tensed, like I was right back in high school, being told I'd never be as successful as Dileia. My heart was pounding. I stood there, silent, humiliated. But then something inside me cracked open. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and scrolled to the email I'd received 3 days earlier. I actually got a job offer this week, I said. Starting in July. Oh? Delia asked, with that too sweet smile. Where? Rennick and Field. San Francisco. UX designer. Starting at $180,000. You could hear the air change. No one said anything for a moment. Delia's mouth twitched like she was about to smile, but it didn't quite land. Blair just blinked. Someone coughed. And I looked at all of them, the golden child and her shiny circle, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was less than. I felt like I won something. Not the game they were playing, but the one I'd been fighting through alone for years. After that, the party continued, but it was quieter around me. People were polite. Someone even congratulated me sincerely. But Delia? She barely spoke to me for the rest of the evening. A few days later, she sent me a long, passive-aggressive text. Something like, "You really didn't have to show me up like that in front of my friends. I was just trying to be lighthearted and celebrate you, but you embarrassed me." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. I didn't respond because I wasn't sure if I should feel guilty or vindicated. For years, I had tolerated little digs, casual dismissals, and being the invisible one in my own family. That night, something changed. It wasn't about money, not really, it was about finally having proof that I was worth something. That I had value outside of how my sister defined me. And the fact that it came in the form of a six-figure offer? That was just a poetic bonus. The days after the party were weird. My parents didn't bring up what happened directly, but my mom sent me a half-hearted "so proud of you" text with a heart emoji, and my dad made a vague comment on a Facebook photo like, "Congrats, Mira. All that hard work paid off." I think they were trying to keep the peace. That's always been their way, no confrontation, just carefully packaged pleasantries and looking the other way. I started packing for the move. The job was in San Francisco, and I was ready. Scared, but ready. I'd never lived more than an hour from home, but I was craving distance like oxygen. I needed space. Physically, emotionally, every way possible. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how cramped I'd been living all these years, always trying to squeeze into a version of myself that made other people more comfortable. Delia didn't text again after that first message. I thought maybe she was giving me space, or maybe stewing in her own feelings. Either way, I didn't reach out either. We weren't close to begin with, and I was tired of being the one to smooth things over. That role had always fallen to me, be the good daughter, the grateful one, the understanding little sister. I didn't want it anymore. Then, a week before my flight, she showed up. I was at our parents' house, sorting through some old stuff in the basement, trying to figure out what was worth shipping and what should just be left behind. I heard the door open upstairs and footsteps on the stairs, and then Delia was just there. No warning, no text. Just her, in a crisp blouse and high-waisted jeans, like she was walking into a meeting, not a moment. "Hey," she said, like nothing had happened. I looked up from the cardboard box I was taping shut and raised an eyebrow. She stood awkwardly in the doorway. For someone who always seemed so put together, she suddenly looked unsure of herself. I was in the area. Thought maybe we could talk. I didn't say anything. I just kept taping the box, more for something to do than anything else. "I didn't mean to humiliate you," she said finally. "At the party." I paused, then sat back on my heels. "But you did." She opened her mouth, closed it again, and sighed. I thought I was being funny. That it would lighten the mood. It wasn't funny to me. There was a long silence. She looked around the basement, like she needed somewhere to land her eyes. The old ping-pong table was still folded against the wall. Our childhood art projects were stacked in dusty plastic bins. I guess I didn't realize it would bother you that much, she said, and I felt the familiar flicker of resentment rise in me, because of course she didn't. She never did. You've been doing it for years, Dileia, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Making little comments, comparing timelines. Calling me a late bloomer isn't new. It's just the first time I said something back. She looked genuinely thrown by that. Like it hadn't even occurred to her how her words had landed over the years. Wasn't trying to be mean, she said softly. But you were still trying to be above me. That hung in the air like dust in the sunlight. She sat on the bottom step and exhaled. You know, I used to be terrified of not being the best. I blinked. That was not something I expected to hear. I was so scared of being ordinary, she continued. And then you, she stopped herself, glanced up at me, you struggled, and I think I used that to reassure myself. That I was still ahead. I swallowed hard. I didn't know what to say to that. And when you pulled out that job offer, she added, with a small, tight smile, I felt small. For the first time in a long time. And I didn't like it. It was maybe the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I didn't rush to comfort her. For once, I let the silence stretch. She seemed to feel it too, because she didn't expect me to make it better. I don't want us to be like this, she said after a while. I know we're never going to be best friends or anything, but I'd like to. Not be at war. I nodded. That'd be nice. She stood, wiped her hands on her jeans. Well, I guess I'll let you get back to packing. And just like that, she was gone again. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. No hugs, no tears. But it was real. And that was new. After she left, I sat on the cold basement floor for a long time. Thinking. Not just about what she said, but what I hadn't said. About all the years I'd spent trying to prove I was worth something. How much of my energy had gone into keeping up, into surviving someone else's shadow. 2 days before my flight to San Francisco, I went for a walk around Maplewood. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to see it all again, not the picture-perfect version in the holiday cards, but the real town. The park where I used to hide with my sketchpad, the old library with the creaky floors and sun-faded encyclopedias, the bus stop where I'd sit waiting with headphones jammed in, just trying to disappear. This town raised me, but it also boxed me in. For the longest time, I measured myself by the eyes that watched me here. Delia's success. My parents' expectations. The neighbors' polite curiosity felt like surveillance. The mental scoreboard where I always seemed to be trailing behind. I realized how much space I had never claimed for myself, how much of my own story I had outsourced to other people's definitions. Back at home, my mom had started trying to act like nothing had happened. She hovered in the background, offering to help me pack, folding clothes I didn't ask her to fold, dropping passive comments like, "It's going to be so quiet without you," or "I guess this is what letting go looks like." She didn't bring up the party. Neither did my dad. On my last night in New Jersey, my parents insisted on taking me out to dinner. We went to a little Italian place downtown. The same one we'd gone to after Delia's Yale acceptance came in. I remembered that night in detail, how she was radiant in a navy dress, how everyone in the restaurant seemed to clap when the waiter brought a congratulations cannoli. I had worn jeans and quietly picked at my pasta, fading into the background of her spotlight. This time, I wore a green wrap dress I'd bought just for the move. Not fancy, but comfortable. Confidence. We sat at a corner table. The mood was calm, if a little tense. My dad asked about my new apartment, about moving logistics. My mom asked if I'd be okay on my own. Neither asked about Dileia. Halfway through dinner, my mom reached across the table and touched my hand. "You know we're proud of you, right?" I looked at her for a moment, wondering if I should let that sit, or if I should be honest. "I believe you're trying," I said. It wasn't meant to be cruel. Just the truth. She looked down at her plate, nodded once, and didn't push it. I think we were both tired of pretending things were simpler than they were. After dinner, I went back to my room and stared at the half-packed suitcases. I should have been sleeping. But my head was spinning, thoughts turning over like laundry in a machine. Old memories mixing with new ones. That party. The years leading up to it. My sister's face when I told her my salary. The silence that followed. Sometime around 1 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find my dad standing there with 2 mugs of tea. He didn't say anything. Just handed one to me and sat down at the foot of my bed like he used to when I was little and couldn't sleep. "You remind me of your grandmother," he said quietly. Quiet, but sharp. People didn't always see her coming either. I smiled a little at that. She didn't finish school. Not because she wasn't smart, she was just working 2 jobs, helping her mom. But she read everything she could get her hands on. Built a business from scratch. No fanfare. Just grit. He took a sip of tea. "I think sometimes your mom and I didn't know how to parent you properly. We were so used to Delia's pace. We thought pushing you to keep up was love." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't an apology, exactly. But it was something. He left the mug on my nightstand and patted my shoulder. "You're gonna do just fine out there." When I finally lay down, I felt not peaceful, but maybe prepared. Not everything had healed. There were still fractures in my relationship with Dileia, with my parents, and even with myself. But I wasn't leaving in search of anyone's approval anymore. I was leaving on my own terms. The morning of my flight was a blur. Bags in the trunk, one last walk through the house, the smell of toast and coffee in the kitchen. My mom hugged me tightly, eyes glassy but not crying. My dad carried my suitcase to the car like he always did. Dileia didn't come by. I wasn't surprised. We drove to Newark in silence, save for the radio playing some soft 80s ballad. My mom kept adjusting the air vents, a nervous habit. My dad watched the road. When we got to the terminal, they both got out and hugged me goodbye. I promised to call when I landed. They said they'd come to visit in the fall. And then I was through security. Alone. Free. As I sat by the gate, boarding pass in hand, I checked my phone out of habit. There was a message waiting. From Dileia. Just one line, "You'll be good out there. I always knew you would." Even when I didn't act like it. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply. Not right away. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I didn't want to respond out of habit. I wanted to feel what it meant first. I sat in that airport terminal, surrounded by strangers, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Not my sister. Not my parents. Not even myself. The plane ride to San Francisco was quiet. I had a window seat, and for most of the flight, I just watched the world roll out beneath the clouds. Cities blurred into mountain ranges, into farmland, into desert. The movement felt symbolic, like I was flying straight out of one version of myself into another. I landed in the early evening. The air was different, cooler, less humid than Jersey. The sky was a soft gradient of pale orange and gray, and there was this buzz in the atmosphere, like potential humming underneath everything. Even the Uber ride to my new apartment felt unreal, like I was inside someone else's milestone moment. The apartment itself was small, but clean. A studio in Bernal Heights with a tiny balcony and just enough room for me and my new life. The walls were bare, and my furniture hadn't arrived yet, but I didn't care. I sat on the floor that night, eating a burrito out of a paper wrapper, and just listened to the city outside my window, horns, dogs barking, some guy yelling into his phone. It felt alive. The next morning, I walked to the nearest cafe, not because I needed coffee, though I definitely did, but because I needed to feel anchored in this place. I needed to see people, order something, pay for it, take it back to my place, all those tiny rituals that make a city feel like home. I started my job a week later. The office was modern and sleek, full of open spaces, glass walls, and people in hoodies and high tops with laptops covered in stickers. I felt out of place at first. Imposter syndrome came in like a wave. Who was I to be here, among all these talented people who probably graduated on time, had clean resumes, perfect portfolios? But slowly, that fear started to erode. Because as the days passed, I realized no one really cared about my past. No one asked how long I took to graduate. No one knew, or if they did, they never brought it up. What mattered was how I worked. How I solved problems. How I thought. And I was good. Better than I even let myself believe. By the second month, my manager started looping me into higher-level design meetings. I was given a solo project to lead, small, but visible. My coworkers started inviting me out for drinks on Fridays, and for the first time since high school, I didn't feel like the extra wheel. I was part of something, not fighting to be allowed in. Dileia sent a few more texts in the months that followed. They were polite, a little stilted. She shared that her divorce had been finalized, that she was moving to a new apartment in Brooklyn, that she'd started therapy. One afternoon, she messaged, "I'd been thinking a lot about how we grew up. About how much pressure we were both under, in different ways." I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't ignoring her, I was just trying to figure out what I actually wanted from her. What I needed. Eventually, I replied with, "Yeah. Me too." It's weird, looking back and realizing how much of that pressure we turned on each other. She read it. Didn't respond right away. Then later, "I think I made you my measuring stick, Mira. I'm sorry for that." That message hit me differently. Because Delia had always seemed so certain. So composed. But here she was, pulling back the curtain just a little. Admitting that all that comparison, the spotlight she basked in, the shadow she cast, wasn't as fulfilling as it looked from the outside. We started texting a bit more regularly after that. Not often. Not deep conversations. Just little updates. Memes. Headlines. A recipe she sent me for a roasted tomato soup after I posted a picture of a rainy San Francisco day on Instagram. Meanwhile, I kept building my life. I found a tiny second-hand couch on Facebook Marketplace. I bought prints from a local art fair and framed them myself. I started going to yoga on Sundays, not because I cared about flexibility, but because it helped my mind slow down. One weekend, I drove to Point Reyes and just sat by the cliffs, watching the water crash below. There was something comforting about the chaos of it, the unpredictability of the waves, the fog that rolled in and out like breath. I thought about the party again. About standing in front of all those people while my sister narrated my life like a quirky little redemption arc. And then I thought about what it felt like to quietly drop that job offer into the room like a pebble in still water. The ripple it caused. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about getting even. It was about balance. About reclaiming the narrative that had always been told about me instead of by me. At work, things picked up even more. I got pulled into a cross-functional team developing a health app's new accessibility feature. It was meaningful work, and I threw myself into it completely. I was exhausted, but happy. I hadn't felt that combination in a long time. Then, one night in early October, my mom called. We hadn't spoken much beyond the occasional check-in text. I had braced myself for one of those "we miss you" guilt trips, but it wasn't that. "Delia told me she's visiting you," she said. I blinked. "She what? She didn't tell you?" "No, well. She bought a flight. Says she wants to see your new place. Clear the air." That sparked an entire forest fire in my chest. I didn't know how to feel. Confused? Anxious? Defensive? She could have told me herself. I think she's scared you'll say no. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. She humiliated me in front of 20 people. I think I get to be the scared one. There was a pause on the line. Then, people grow up. Sometimes slowly. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the street lights blink one by one. I thought about the person I'd been 6 months ago. The one who stood awkwardly at a party thrown in her name, trying not to shrink under her sister's spotlight. And I thought about the woman I was now. With a job. An apartment. A spine. Maybe Dileia was trying. Maybe I was ready to see her again. Or maybe I wasn't. Either way, she was coming. I had 3 days to prepare for Dileia's visit. I didn't clean like a maniac or plan an itinerary. This wasn't a hospitality exercise. I did enough to make the apartment presentable, picked up a few things she might need: extra toothbrush, clean towels, a bottle of her favorite Cabernet I found on sale, and then I let it go. She texted me the day before her flight, landing at 1:15. "Can't wait to see you." I replied, "See you soon." That was it. When I picked her up from SFO, she looked different. Not tired, exactly. More like softened. Like the armor she always wore, the perfectly curated outfit, the polished tone, the magazine-ed energy, had dulled into something less performative. She wore sneakers. Carried a weekender bag instead of a sleek suitcase. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't that overly sweet, PR-perfect smile. It was real. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I replied. We hugged. Quick, no tears. Then we got in the car and drove in silence for a while, music playing low. It felt like a truce in progress. At my apartment, she looked around and nodded in approval. "This is cute." Very Mira made it. I raised an eyebrow. "Not bad for a late bloomer, right?" She winced. "Oof. Okay. Deserved that." We both laughed. A real one this time. Tension bled off, like steam hissing out of a pot. That first night, we kept it light. Ordered Thai, sat on the floor like we used to during sleepovers as kids, and watched old episodes of Gilmore Girls. It was surprisingly easy. Comfortable. But the next day, things shifted. She followed me into the kitchen while I made coffee. I could feel the words building in her. And eventually, they came. "I've been dreading this trip," she said. I kept stirring the sugar into my mug. "Why?" "Because I knew you had every right to say no. And I didn't know what I'd do if you didn't let me try to fix it." I handed her a cup and leaned against the counter. "Why now, though? Why try at all?" She didn't answer right away. Just stared into her coffee like it might tell her what to say. "I think part of me always needed you to stay where you were," she said finally. "Because if you caught up, if you passed me, it would mean I was never that far ahead to begin with." She looked up at me. "When you dropped that job offer at the party, I wanted to disappear. Because suddenly you were undeniable. You had something I couldn't spin or downplay. It forced me to look at myself in a way I hadn't before." I nodded, slow. "So you were threatened?" She didn't flinch. "Yes." It was weirdly satisfying to hear her say it. Not because I wanted her to grovel. But because I finally understood, her cruelty had never been about me. It had been about her fear. Her own internal scoreboard. "I used to think you were just lucky," she said. "But it's not luck. You're actually good. At what you do. At who you are. I see that now." And then came the line I didn't expect: "I want to do something for you." I looked at her, skeptical. "Like what?" "Let me host a party. Here. For you. Real friends, your coworkers, people who know you. Not some fake social circle from 10 years ago." I blinked. "Why?" Because the last one was for me, she said, even if I pretended it wasn't. This one should be yours. And I want to give you the party you actually deserved. I didn't answer immediately. But later that day, I texted a few friends, ordered catering from a local vegan Mexican fusion place I loved, and let her take care of the rest. The party was held the following Saturday. Our tiny apartment filled with laughter, spilled drinks, folding chairs, and the scent of Chipotle jackfruit tacos. My coworkers came, plus a few friends from my yoga class, and even my downstairs neighbor who I'd helped when her cat got stuck behind the fridge. Real people. People who knew me for me. Dileia mingled like a pro, but she didn't dominate the space. She helped pour wine, handed out napkins, laughed when someone spilled salsa on her shoes. It was like watching a deflated balloon come back to life, not puffed up, but buoyant. Halfway through the evening, she blinked her glass. I froze for a second, flashbacks to that awful backyard toast, but then I saw her glance at me, asking for permission with her eyes. I gave her the tiniest nod. She turned to the group and said, "Hi, everyone. I'm Myra's sister. Some of you know me, some of you don't. But I want to say something, and I promise to keep it short and not mortifying." Everyone chuckled. I once threw Mira a graduation party that ended up being more about me than her. And at that party, I called her a late bloomer. Which was rude, dismissive, and completely untrue. She turned to me. Myra's not a late bloomer. She bloomed exactly when she was supposed to. And what's more, she grew roots. Deep ones. The kind that hold up mountains. There were a few ahs, and someone even clapped. Delia raised her glass. To Mira. Who didn't just find her path, she made it. That was the moment. The satisfying revenge. Not because she cried or begged. Not because I made her feel small. But because she stood in front of a room full of people I respected, and told the truth. My truth. And in doing so, she finally let go of the story she had tried to write about me for years. The rest of the night was a blur of music and dancing and someone accidentally dropping a bowl of guac off the balcony. I laughed until my ribs hurt. After everyone left, Delia and I sat on the couch, shoes off, plates piled in the sink. I meant every word, she said. I know, I said. We didn't need to say more. In the end, I got what I never thought I'd have, not just recognition, not just respect, but control of my own story. Delia was still Delia. Polished, dramatic, trying, but trying. And I was still me. But now, finally, enough. And that was more than I ever expected.